So it's upgrade time in the shop today. My Harbor Freight pressure pot kind of bit the dust. So the seal in the lid has been giving me problems for a while now, and as I was having to tighten it more and more, two of the clamps lost the thread so they don't tighten down anymore. I could go about trying to get new clamps and a new seal and fix this up, but I've been kind of outgrowing this thing, so it's time for an upgrade. So instead of going with another 2.5 gallon pot, I went out and I splurged. And I bought myself a California Air's 5 gallon pressure pot, which will double the size of it so I can do bigger projects in it. Alright, so without further delay, let's get this thing unpacked. So as you can see, this thing is substantially bigger than my old one, and even the clamping system looks a lot more robust than the Harbor Freight one was, so these things should last forever. Let's get this thing opened up and take a look inside. So the first thing I see about this is, compared to the Harbor Freight pot, this one's got a lot flatter bottom to it, so it's not really that concave. Comes with a caster kit. So let's get that on, and it'll make it easier moving it around in the shop, because this thing's a lot heavier than my old one. Alright, so that's going to make it a lot easier to roll around on the floor, and I can slide it right underneath my workbenches. So some of the things you want to look at when you're buying a pressure pot is you want to make sure where the air fills that there's some type of fitting that redirects the air coming into the tank to the sides instead of just shooting it straight down in. As you can see, here's where the air enters into the tank, and it's got a hole on each side of it right there that lets the air come that way and that way. It doesn't shoot down, so if you have a resin casting that's directly underneath it, it's not going to blow the air right into the resin casting and splash it everywhere. So it's already got a regulator attached. It's already got the air gauge attached. This guy's got an extra air vent to quickly release the air out, so it's no more pulling the safety valve to slowly release the air out of the tank. So the other nice thing about this is it's already got the air nipple attached to it, so I don't have to go digging around my drawers trying to find one to get this thing started up. Alright, so now that it's all set up, which really wasn't that difficult because everything was pretty much set up right out of the box. All I had to do was put the casters on. Let's get a project together so we can test this thing out. So this is a little rough turn cherry burl hollow form that I made. It's got a 1-inch wall thickness, and it's got a lot of inclusions and bark and stuff in it. So we're going to get this thing cleaned up, bake it in the oven for a little bit to get it dry, and then we're going to do a casting project with it. So all I'm looking to do with this, and I'm looking to get any loose bark and loose pieces of wood off of it. That'll increase the voids that the resin will be able to fill into. Alright, so that about does it for getting it cleaned up. There wasn't too much loose bark in it, so I'm down to all good solid wood now. So now it's just a matter of baking it for a little bit to make sure that the wood is bone dry, and then we'll get this thing into the casting pot. So this is what it looks like after it's been baked in the oven and all the loose bark pieces and stuff has been cleaned off of it. I didn't get back to this right away, so I put it in a plastic bag and sealed it up tight so the wood wouldn't absorb any moisture. And I'm going to be using Aluminolite Clear Slow for this. It doesn't like any moisture at all, so if there's any moisture in the wood, it will start to foam, even in a pressure pot. So you want to always make sure that you wrap it up tight in a plastic bag if you're not going to do the casting right away. So for this one, I'm going to reconstruct the rim with a plastic bag and, believe it or not, a paper towel cardboard tube. So the first thing I want to do is take a plastic bag, stuff it inside the best I can get it. Without tearing the bag. Alright, so that's opened up enough on the inside. So now I am just going to fill the thing with some sand. This sand's going to just push the plastic up against the inside of the hollow form to minimize the amount of resin that I'm going to need for this. Alright, so now I want to work the cardboard tube into it. Make sure I'm coming up somewhat straight out of the top of it. Okay, now I'm going to bust out my trusty duct tape. Get that on. This is going to pull the plastic tight and keep it from getting too tangled up in the resin. Alright, so there's the inside. Now, to minimize the resin loss, just a kitchen plastic bag. You can use any plastic bag. I don't know if I would use a plastic shopping bag, but something a little bit thicker than that. And I have a tenon on the bottom, so I want to preserve that tenon. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my trusty duct tape, find that tenon, and wrap it tight around there to try to minimize the resin seepage that goes down around that, so it's easier to clean up when I'm all done. I gotta find something that I can set this down so it's not wobbling all around. There we go, that works pretty good. Alright, so the next part is to mix up some resin. So you always want to wear your safety gloves. You don't want to get this stuff on your hands. It's not that good for your skin. And I have an exhaust fan running. You want to do this in a well ventilated area. You don't want to breathe the fumes from this resin, even if it doesn't smell really bad. You don't want to breathe that stuff in. Move this off to the side. Aluminite clear and clear slow are measured by weight, so it makes it a lot easier to get pretty precise measurements out of it. I'm using a small scale. Go to measure in grams because that's the finest measurement over ounces. I gotta take a guess at the volume that I'm using because I don't know exact, but what I like to do is I have a little silicone cookie mold that I use to pour all my extra resin in. That way I can use it because I do thread chasing too, and thread chasing, there's only so many woods that are strong enough to hold the thread, so you can make nice inserts out of those little round pieces that are left over from your resin. Okay, so I'm at 238.3 grams for the first one. Okay, close enough. Alright, so for this one I'm going to use some Eye Candy Azura Blue and a couple drops of Ocean Blue Transparent tint from Aluminite. These Aluminite dyes are extremely concentrated, so a little bit goes a long way. You can see how much 2 drops it darkened that volume of resin. For the mica powder, there's a couple grams left. That should be more than enough for make sure that you let the mixer scrape all the sides and the bottom as best you can into the corners. I am not too concerned about air bubbles because we're going to be throwing this into a pressure pot, so that will get rid of them all. And I didn't mix it all that heavy, fast speed, so there shouldn't be too many air bubbles in there. So now comes the fun part. We're going to start taping this thing up with my trusty duct tape again. So with this Aluminite, you don't want to dilly-dally too much because it doesn't have a super long work time like some of the epoxy resins do. So I'm just going to tape it right down to that cap, and it'll make it a lot easier for me to manage it. Alright, so now that I got that set, all I'm going to do is start adding in some resin and then tape the bag up as I go. I can already tell I'm probably going to have a ton of resin left over. I mixed way too much for this. But we won't let it go to waste. Let it go, let it seep down a little bit. So now I'm up to the neck. So now I got it up to here, I've got to make a rim. So there's a Dixie cup. Keep it somewhat snug around it. Make sure it's somewhat centered. Alright, so now it's centered. We're going to pour some and just fill up till you get close to the top of the cardboard tube. I made this neck higher than it needed to be. That way if a little bit of the resin still seeps down in, it won't be an issue. These are the little cookie molds. They're like 2 by 1.5 inches. A little bit of mold release. Alright, so now all I have to do is load this thing into the pressure pot. Which having a somewhat flat bottom is really nice. Get my 3 little holes. I already tell this is so much easier to see what them all the freaking that was. Alright. It's all closed up. And we'll see how well this thing holds air pressure overnight. So everything's been in the pressure pot for 24 hours by now. So it's time to get it all out of here. So one thing I can tell you is this thing held pressure really good. It didn't drop a single pound. My pressure pot, it would never hold pressure for more than 10 hours before it was pretty much down to 0. So just a real good sign here. Alright, so let's get this stuff all out of this pressure pot and see what we got. The one nice thing about this pot is it's got a ball valve to release the air pressure. My Harbor Freight one, only real way to get the air pressure out of it was to pop open the safety release valve. That one drained the pressure out a lot faster than my other one did. Let's open this lid up. First things first, holoform. No signs of leaks, so that's a good thing. And then Got my 3 little pucks for future projects. Alright, so the first thing is the little pucks. It's easy to just pop those out. I'll put a link down in the description below on where I got these, but I got them off of Amazon, so they're really easy to get and they're really fast to get. Put those aside for future projects. Now it's time to unwrap this guy and see what we got. Got a few spots where the plastic folded over a little bit in the excess resin, but that's not a big deal because it's all going to get turned down. Okay, just gotta something to dump that sand out of it into. Alright, so now that it's all out of its mold, let's get this thing on the lathe and get to turning it. I'm going to start by mounting it in my chuck and bring up the tailstock. So when you turn the resin, you want to use some type of exhaust system, or at least a proper mask to help protect your lungs from the dust particles that are going to come off this thing. You really don't want to breathe those in. Alright, so since I'm kind of changing the original profile, that I rough turn this, and I had to take some measurements to see and make sure I'm not making these walls too thin. Okay, so that's about as far as I want to go for the outside for now. I have one spot where I guess there was a crinkle in the plastic, so it left a little bit of an indentation. So I'm going to mix up some 5-minute 2-part epoxy with some of that mica powder and use that to fill that tiny bit of a void in. Throw a couple pieces of painter's tape across it just to contain it and make sure it doesn't move too much. Same thing, but a couple pieces of painter's tape over it to hold it in place, and it'll peel right off of it when it's dry. So now we wait. Usually it's a couple hours. I'm gonna just let it sit overnight, and I will finish this up tomorrow. So now that the sanding's done, I'm applying a couple coats of a 100% pure tung oil and letting it soak in. Once it's soaked in, I'll wipe off the excess and then let it cure for a couple weeks before I move on to the next step. I like using an oil finish for resin and wood turnings because I don't want a film to be over top of the resin. Now that the resin is cured, it's time to buff. I'm starting off with Tripoli just on the wood, then I'll move on to a blue rouge. I'm only using light pressure while I buff. This was a fun project and turned out great. The blue I picked out really contrasts with the cherry and makes it pop. If you're interested in trying some eye candy mica powders, I have a discount code down in my description below. If you want to see more of my resin and wood creations, check out this video next.